Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. On this week's edition, we'll be joined by Ruben Johnson, military expert from the Kazimierz Foundation. But first, let's start with a review of the most important events of the past week, straight from Ukraine.
Ukraine has received its first French-made Mirage 2005F fighter jets, according to the French defense minister. The delivery marks the first time a Western European-designed fighter jet has been given to Kyiv. The planes arrived along with Ukrainian pilots who trained on the model in France. The French authorities have not disclosed the number of aircraft delivered, and the location also remains confidential. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has also confirmed another delivery of US-made F-16 jets from the Netherlands. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion 3 years ago, Ukraine relied on an aging air force inherited from the Soviet era. Now, as it confronts Russian advances in the east, Ukraine has continuously requested Western allies to provide it with more advanced weaponry, including armored vehicles, tanks, long-range missiles and fighter jets. Russia's unrelenting assault continues to devastate Ukraine. Over the past week, Russian attacks killed 11 people and injured over 100 in various regions. Ukraine's air defenses were giving no respite, faced with close to 250 drones launched by Russian forces. Over 150 were neutralized before reaching their target. A tragic strike on the town of Izium in the Kharkiv region killed 5 people, among them a pregnant woman, and injured over 55.
Our driver went out for a smoke, and my child went to the passport office. Then there was an explosion. I saw it all. I saw who was hit. I was not wounded, but our driver was killed.
According to preliminary data, Russian forces used a ballistic missile and targeted the central part of the city. Ukraine's General Staff has reported that its forces have successfully targeted a Russian oil facility in the Krasnodar region and a Buk air defense system in the occupied part of the Zaporizhia region. The attack, carried out by Ukraine's security service and defense forces, set fire to the Albash Neft oil facility in Novominskaya. The extent of damage to the facility is still being determined. The Ukrainian drones also attacked an oil refinery in Volgograd and a gas processing plant in Astrakhan. Both facilities are said to be major fuel providers for the Russian military. The news comes amidst an intensified effort to target critical Russian infrastructure through long-range strikes. Ukraine has carried out a prisoner swap which saw 150 fighters returning home from Russian captivity. According to a statement released on Wednesday, the released personnel includes members of the Navy, Air Force and Territorial Defense Forces. Some of the Ukrainian prisoners had been held for over 2 years, and several are in serious condition requiring extensive rehabilitation. Russia's defense ministry has also confirmed the exchange, stating that the released Russian soldiers have been transferred to Belarus for medical care. President Zelensky has thanked the UAE, which has brokered similar swaps before, for its assistance in coordinating the event. While the swap brings immeasurable relief to many families, thousands still remain in captivity in Russia and occupied Ukrainian territories. Russian casualties have reached nearly 40,000 personnel, with 16,000 killed over 6 months of fighting in the Kursk region. Ukraine has held positions in the region since launching a cross-border incursion last year. While Kyiv has since lost roughly half of the captured area, fighting continues as Ukraine aims to use its presence in Kursk as leverage in potential peace negotiations. Ukraine's General Staff has also noted that Moscow was forced to seek military assistance from North Korea, which deployed around 12,000 troops to the region. Currently, an estimated 4,000 have already been killed. One of the 3 North Korean brigades has been effectively destroyed, while the other 2 lost combat capability, forcing Pyongyang's forces to withdraw from the front lines.
And now it's time to look at the war in Ukraine through the lens of a journalist, and for that I'm now joined by TVP world correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee. Hello, Oz. So we are looking this week at the transfer of French Rafale 2000s, the aircraft, the fighter jets from France. What capabilities are they expected to provide I know that there's not very many of them, but what are the hopes on the ground there in Ukraine for this new weapon, if you will?
Well, I don't think the hopes are that this particular batch is going to make any difference. It's more the cumulative power of these things coming online at the same time. It's important to note that a fresh batch of Dutch F-16s has also arrived at the same time that these French Mirage 2000 jets have arrived. Now, we don't have an official number on the French jets. All of these things are being kept closely guarded by Kyiv. We do understand from some French parliamentary sessions that about 6 of France's Mirages were about to be transferred to Ukraine, but we've got no confirmation of the numbers on this side. So look, it's a small number. It's not going to make a significant difference. But cumulatively, with these new systems coming online, they are going to have a force multiplying effect. Now, Ukraine really insists that these jets are important to them. So we have to take the Ukrainian military at their word that they need these jets, they need these jet fighters that are going to make a difference. In particular, one of the things they've been utilized for is shooting down these ballistic missiles, these rockets that Russia's launching routinely into Ukraine. So hopefully, at the very least, they should be coming online soon to do that. Rustem Umerov, the defense minister, remarked recently that he expects the F-16s that have just arrived from the Netherlands to be seeing combat missions very, very soon.
All right, Oz Chatterjee reporting for us from Kyiv. Thank you for the update. And now joining me to discuss all the recent developments in Ukraine is Ruben Johnson, military expert from the Vladimir Putin Foundation. Hello, Ruben, and thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine this week.
Thank you for having me, sir. Nice to see you.
Yes, great to see you as well. So a story out of Bloomberg this week is saying that the envoy to Russia, Trump's special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, General Kellogg, was earlier supposed to announce the peace plan that Trump has for Ukraine at the Munich Security Conference coming up next weekend. But it seems that Trump is going to make the announcement himself. But according to this article, we do have a few threads about the plan. One of them is peace through strength. But another one that I want to ask you about, and this is, I hope, is subject to change, but it's freezing the conflict on the current lines. That means that essentially the problem of the occupied territories of Ukraine will not be dealt with by this administration in order to achieve a ceasefire. Is this a major threat to ending this conflict and essentially just freezing it in place?
Well, I don't know how. I don't know. Well, first of all, freezing the lines in place is not realistic because where the lines are not necessarily places where you could organize a sustainable long-term disposition of forces, a peacekeeping force, whatever you would do to keep both sides apart. You know, geography, topography, whatever isn't suitable. Politically, I think it's just not workable. I mean, the Ukrainians are going to keep on fighting one way or the other, whether it's partisan warfare or whether it's simply deciding that they don't like the peace agreement in some portion of the lines. I mean, this is not a solution, but the biggest reason it's not a solution is that it rewards the Russians for some extremely barbaric and genocidal behavior.
Yes, and it's often been said that any agreement that is made there in Ukraine, neither side is going to be happy with, and I guess Trump essentially says that's what a good deal is that neither side is happy. Based on what we've been hearing from Trump, lots of mixed signals. Do you think that this is going to, first of all, that Vladimir Putin is even going to entertain the idea of sitting down at the table at this point?
Well, all the indications we've had from the Russians is he's not really interested in talking. He's not interested in talking to Zelensky. And if you read some of the recent reports, what Putin would like, if he had to sit down with anyone, he would like another Munich conference, and I don't mean the security conference. I mean the famous one in which the major powers in Europe got together and divided up Czechoslovakia without the Czechs even being at the table. He'd like to have a conference in which Zelensky doesn't even participate. And I don't see any indicators that Putin's really interested in an agreement. Number one, he thinks he's winning. Number two, he thinks he can outlast us. He thinks that he can keep fighting and keep shoving people in front of bullets longer than we're willing to keep supporting Ukraine. And number three, we've seen him all these years. He's not a strategist. He doesn't know how to organize any sort of a long-term vision for his people. He's destroying his country. All he knows how to do is create chaos. He thrives on chaos. So as long as this chaos goes on, he stays in power. It's like one of my friends in the Belarus opposition said, he says, this war for Putin, it's like riding a bicycle. As long as he keeps pedaling, he stays alive. As soon as the pedaling stops, he falls over and he's done.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. According to Donald Trump, also more sanctions if Russia doesn't enter the talks. Are sanctions a deterrent at this point, based on the fact that we have so many different sanctions packages in place, some of which aren't very well enforced? But is the threat of more sanctions really a stick for Vladimir Putin?
I'm really glad you asked this question, because this is a really good one. And the answer is something that a lot of people don't realize. But okay, you can put sanctions in place. That's fine. You can sign a piece of paper and say, hold it up and say, look, here you are. You're not allowed to do this anymore. The question is, how well, how thorough, how efficient, how competent is the enforcement? General Kellogg himself said recently that on a scale of 1 to 10, the sanctions against Russia on the part of the United States and its allies, on a scale of 1 to 10, the sanctions are at a 6, but the enforcement is about at a 3. So if you really start enforcing these things to the hilt, you start causing lots of pain for Russia. And there's plenty of headroom, because there's a lot of difference between a 6 and a 10.
Yes, and well, another talking point seems to be, and this is one both sides are, I guess, trying to capitalize on or develop the idea, and this is an interesting one, especially when we look at Donald Trump and all of the, how best to say this, all of the very non-traditional things that he has been pushing around the world, yes? So when we talk about minerals, rare earth, something that Donald Trump expresses interest in Ukraine, President Vladimir Zelensky also saying that this would be on the table. What's interesting is that a lot of Ukraine's rare earth is in the occupied territories in the Donbass. So if Trump wants to be able to access them, he's going to have to find a way to get the Russians out, I would imagine. Should we really be paying attention to this part of the equation, the access for American companies to, say, minerals, rare earth, or other natural resources in Ukraine?
Well, we should be paying a lot of attention to it, because if there's no access for American companies because the Russians are allowed to stay there, then there's going to be access for Chinese companies. That's one of the reasons the Chinese are supporting Putin and risking more sanctions, is because they want access to those minerals. The Chinese have a very long wish list for what they would like to be doing in this part of Europe. And they've got tremendous strategic value and tremendous monetary value in the trillions of dollars.
Yes, indeed. And of course, Donald Trump, a very transactional negotiator. So therefore, this could be perhaps something attractive to him. Now, I'd also like to ask you about sanctions on the International Criminal Court, because, well, obviously, Donald Trump is not happy with the situation that Benjamin Netanyahu is in. However, we do have an indictment for Vladimir Putin by the International Criminal Court, which begs the question, what next? If the U.S. sanctions the prosecutors in the ICC, Does this completely ruin the case that they have against Vladimir Putin?
I wouldn't say that. The problem that a lot of people have with the ICC is, yes, there is an international arrest warrant out for Putin for launching an illegal war and causing the deaths of, we still don't know how many people, but probably 1 million or more. And whenever Putin has the occasion where he must attend a BRICS summit or some other international event, people go into all sorts of gyrations trying to figure out ways for him to participate. They seem to be going out of their way to keep him from getting arrested. Whereas the same people sort of look at the prospect of Benjamin Netanyahu being arrested. They sort of rub their hands together with glee. And what's the charge against him? Because they went into Gaza after what happened on October 7th, 2023. There's an inequity there. And that's what I think has Trump and other people. That's what's been the rationale behind the sanction on the officials of the International Court.
Well, do you think that these sanctions will somehow coerce these officials to give up on Benjamin Netanyahu?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that's not a very good answer, but yet one would hope so, because right now the situation in the Middle East is certainly better than what it was, and you remember the previous administration, just literally days before the October 7, 2023 attack, the previous national security advisor had an article published in Foreign Affairs, which is our leading American foreign policy journal, supposedly, and in which he said, "Oh, the Middle East is calmer than it's been in decades." And then suddenly there's this horrible, just absolutely horrific murder and genocide in southern Israel. So people are saying that things are terrible with Netanyahu and what he's doing, and then I always have to say, well, compared to what and compared to when?
Mm-hmm. Well, now looking at the whirlwind of announcements we've seen out of Trump in his first 3 weeks now of his presidency, one thing that I've been trying to pay particular attention to, and this is when he makes statements like not ruling out military force to take Greenland, of course, maybe trying to take back the Panama Canal, things of this nature. And then if we look at the freezing the conflict on the current front lines in Ukraine, the possibility that even Ukraine would have to cede territory, I'm wondering, is this a dangerous precedent that Donald Trump is setting in emboldening potentially Russian imperial ambitions? And also this does affect China as well, and their outlook in the world. So do you think that these moves are dangerous for the world? Do you think that Trump has maybe another strategy that he's trying to get help from his allies on certain issues and just making noise? What should we take away from Trump's threats of this nature?
Well, I don't put all three of those, the Panama Canal, Greenland, the war in Ukraine. I don't put all three of them in the same basket. When it comes to, I've had discussions about this with friends of mine. Some of whom are close to the transition team. But if you look at Trump's style, what's his style? He tends to come straight on at people. It's just how he does business. People talk about being in negotiations where he comes into a room with an army of lawyers and tries to flatten you against the wall. And then, once there's a reaction and there's an awful lot of back and forth, and people get very agitated. And then he sits down and says, okay, well, let's see if we can work something out. So it's more round one of a negotiating tactic, particularly the business about Greenland. There is a precedent for the United States having a military presence in Greenland. During the Second World War, they were still officially a protectorate of Denmark. Denmark was conquered, it was overrun, and the United States had to move in to keep German U-boats from just prowling anywhere they wanted off of that part of North America. And And so Greenland has benefited from for many years from the United States military presence. But this is him negotiating. But when it comes to Ukraine, I really, some of the things that I'm hearing, I don't like the idea at all that we would freeze the lines of conflict. I think that would be sending a horrible message. I don't like the other message that I'm hearing, that somehow it's a horrible thing that Ukraine has not held elections during the war. Well, they have a constitution that says they're not supposed to. And then I'd like to remind people that between 1945, for 10 years, the United Kingdom never held an election. Churchill was prime minister for most of that time, because during a war, that's not something, that's not a luxury you can afford.
Yeah, and the possibility of Russian interference is also something that enters our minds when we talk about elections. It's such a volatile time for the country, not to mention the laws and martial law. Well, Ruben Johnson, military expert from the Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation, thank you very much for joining us today. And I guess we're still kind of holding our breath to see exactly how this peace plan takes shape. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
And that concludes this edition of Ukraine This Week. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to join us again next week for all the updates on the latest from the war in Ukraine. Goodbye.